Okay. Hi, good afternoon. We're group 10, and today we're going to talk about the history of the smallpox. My name is Maria Patino.
I'm Ashley Thompson.
I'm Stephanie Beltran.
And I'm Jade Rodriguez, and we're Group 10.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the introduction. Smallpox is a disease caused by variola virus, and this virus is part of a group called orthopod virus. And there are two kinds of smallpox. The first one is variola major, which was very deadly, and variola minor, which was less deadly. Smallpox only infected humans, and it is spread from person to person through tiny drops when people were close to each other. And children got it more easily than adults. The virus did not live long outside of the body, and the sickness started about 12 days after someone got infected. And at first, there were not signs. So then later on, the people got fever, chills, headaches, and back pain. Also, many people who lived through smallpox had scars, and some of them had also other problems with their arms or legs.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about on what is smallpox in and of itself. So smallpox is a human disease, like mentioned before, caused by the variola virus. There are two types of variola virus, variola major and variola minor. Variola major is the one that has the leading cause between the two, and it is the one that we are going to focus on today. Smallpox contamination is spread by either close proximity or direct contact to a lesion of a person that's been infected. The variola virus is a very interesting kind of virus because it does not need the nucleus of the host cell in order to replicate. This kind of virus carries its own transcription machinery and therefore replicates instead of replicating in the nucleus using the host cell's nucleus and transcription machinery. It uses its own and replicates in the cytoplasm of the cell. Once this virus is inside the cytoplasm of the host cell, it releases its own transcription factors, like capping enzymes and RNA polymerases, and it wastes no time in beginning its transcription process. The transcription being done in the cytoplasm allows for the virus to replicate fast and take control of the cell. Another factor that makes this virus so successful at replicating is its ability to block the immune system's attempt to fight back. After the initial infection is done, and it is done through the respiratory tract, the virus spreads through the bloodstream, and that is typically when patients start feeling their first set of symptoms, which are, like we mentioned before, fever, body aches, and vomiting. The lesions that form on a patient's skin are due to the virus inhibiting the skin cells and replicating at very fast speeds in those cells, which then the immune system tries to react to it. And through the reaction the immune system does, that's when these lesions form.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about early history, when the smallpox was first discovered. So the start of the smallpox is not fully known. So some of scientists think that it began around 6,000 years ago, around that, and because that was when people started living together. And there is proof it might have been in ancient Egypt, because the mummy of Ramses the Fifth has marks that look like a smallpox. The first clear medical writing about a smallpox was done by a man named Ramses in the 10th century. But smallpox was already in India and in China before he wrote it about it. From Egypt, smallpox moved to Asia and to Africa, and later on it reached Europe. During the Middle Ages, the disease spread more because people traveled and traded goods and came back from the Crusades.
So, as you can see in the image, that is the mummy of Ramses V. And to add on to the early history of smallpox, before the cowpox vaccine was widely available, different areas affected by smallpox had their own early methods of attempting to create immunity against the disease through variolation. In China, they utilized nasal insufflation, a practice in which they would blow powdered smallpox scabs, sometimes mixed with plant material, into the nose. In colonial India, they would surgically create an incision in the arm and inject dried smallpox matter into it. And during the Ottoman Empire, they would create several small punctures in the skin with a needle and insert a drop of smallpox material, usually pus, into the openings. These methods, although they provided some control against smallpox outbreaks, were still very risky overall.
So, when a patient is diagnosed with smallpox, they will go through several stages of development, and the whole process can last for about 5 weeks. It starts with the incubation period, which is the time between the initial infection and when symptoms start to occur. This stage varies between 7 to 17 days, and during this period, the patient shows no sign of symptoms and is not contagious. So, this means that in the beginning stages, a person could have been infected with smallpox and have no idea until they start experiencing those initial symptoms. After that initial period, they will experience prodromal symptoms, which are early signs and indicators of a disease. This usually lasts 3 to 4 days, where the patient will experience a lot of discomfort, including a high fever of about 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. They will also deal with body chills, headaches, backaches, and even nausea or vomiting. Next is the rash development stage, which is when the patient becomes contagious and there's a high viral load in their saliva, meaning that they are highly capable of transmitting the disease to others through respiratory droplets. During this period, a maculopapular rash develops inside the mouth and pharynx as well as the face. Maculopapular rashes are a type of rash that consists of discolored spots and lesions that can be either flat or raised. The rash will then spread to the rest of the body, including the forearms and the legs. A few days later, the rash becomes vesicular, then eventually pustular. By the eighth or ninth day of the rashes forming, scabs will form that eventually will fall off and leave pitted scars. This is also the time where death can occur. So, looking at the image, this is an example of what smallpox rashes can look like. They can appear as macules, which are flat lesions, or papules, which are raised lesions. And in this specific image, you can see that there's a slight mix of both. And then once these dry out and turn into scabs, they'll eventually fall off and then leave deep scars. So, a lot of the spread of smallpox was due to travel and trades, and in the first millennium, Egyptian traders traveling across the sea or through caravans is believed to be the introduction of the disease to the East. In the first or second century, although the geographical origin of smallpox is unknown, one theory is that it originated in the Horn of Africa, where it later spread to China and Europe. Later in the 6th and 7th centuries, Japan was introduced to smallpox through exchanges and trades with China and Korea. In the 11th and 13th centuries, the Crusades, which is a series of religious wars, spread the disease heavily throughout Europe. Now, between the 16th and 18th centuries is when smallpox has had the most devastating impact globally. So, in the 16th century, European colonization brought smallpox to North America and South America. It was also brought to Central America from the slave trade and through the infected ports. The creation of Spanish and Portuguese colonies was the link between the introduction of smallpox in the New World, and this caused mass mortality in the Aztec and Inca populations. Also, smallpox spread to the Caribbean, affecting Santo Domingo, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and other Caribbean islands. In the 17th century, smallpox was introduced to Russia, and severe epidemics occurred in Siberian communities. By the mid-18th century, smallpox became a widespread disease, majorly affecting multiple populations. However, it only became a major epidemic in Australia in the late 18th century. So, again, smallpox has caused an immense amount of devastation amongst multiple populations. So, this is just some of the impact that the disease has left around the world. In the early 16th century, smallpox killed about 3 to 4 million people from the Aztec and Inca empires and began to invade Central America, Peru, Brazil, and the Caribbean, where half of the indigenous population were killed. In the beginning of the 17th century, South America and North America experienced smallpox outbreaks, heavily affecting Massachusetts due to European colonization, and the outbreaks also heavily affected Boston and New York. Smallpox was estimated to have caused 400,000 deaths in Europe each year in the 18th century, and many European monarchs, including Queen Mary II of England, have died from smallpox between the 17th and 18th century. Lastly, in the 20th century alone, smallpox is estimated to have caused 300 to 500 million deaths globally. So the image at the bottom is a graph demonstrating the number of reported smallpox cases in 31 countries and how it has declined over the years. There were 131,789 reported cases of smallpox in 1967, and by 1977, the last case was reported. So, although the 20th century experienced hundreds of millions of deaths worldwide, it is also the century where smallpox became eradicated.
Okay, so now let's talk about the vaccination of smallpox and how it came to be. So, the word vaccine comes from the vaccinia virus, which is a virus that causes infection in cattle. It is a poxvirus that opened the pathway to smallpox vaccination. The vaccinia virus was the first immunization agent that was discovered that can help prevent a wide variety of different infections. The first step towards vaccination was done using the technique of variolation, which was taken to Europe during the 1700s. The technique is done by introducing a virus or bacteria into a non infected person in order to trigger an immune system response. Um, this, and in order to trigger an immune system response, and in that way, in order to make the immune system create defenses against the infection or bacteria. This is still a technique that we use to this day with any vaccinations that we get. This was first done by, or more or less, this process of the vaccine was first done by Dr. Edward Jenner. He was a country doctor, which He published an article in 1978 where he argued that farmers were immune to smallpox due to the exposure and previous infections of cowpox. Through this published article, Jenner introduced immunization against smallpox using cowpox. And initially, the vaccine faced a lot of opposition all around, especially from the church. And the general public, too, also was opposed to the vaccine because they argued that it wasn't truly that effective, considering it needed a booster shot every 3 years. Now, the eradication of smallpox. So, in 1958, Professor Sodanov insisted that the World Health Organization, or the WHO, should begin a global smallpox eradication program. By 1959, it was launched, but it wasn't until 1966 that the necessary funds for this eradication program were allocated. The eradication program included freeze-dried vaccines. It required the participation of all countries, surveillance and case investigations for any cases that arose, and continuous research. So, freeze-dried vaccines are vaccines that are frozen and can be transported to any part of the world without needing that refrigeration. Through this, the bifurcated needle was developed, which allowed for more efficiency when administering these vaccines, meaning that a small flask of vial of vaccine could be used on of many different people because the needle allowed for just a small dose, so it was efficient. Um, the last case of smallpox in Brazil was reported in 1971 and in 1972 in Indonesia. Variola major had been eradicated from the Indian subcontinent, but the minor variant still persisted. Finally, on May 8th, 1980, the World Health Organization announced that the eradication of smallpox had been achieved, and this was the first time that any disease had been successfully banished.
Okay, so the impact on public health. The smallpox vaccine had a significant and long-lasting effect and impact on public health and modern medicine. So, before Edward Jenner's vaccine, ineffective vaccinations were already in use in continents like Asia and Africa. But these vaccines weren't really effective as it would often have the opposite effect and actually infect healthy individuals with the disease. This was because they had realized that people who were previously infected with smallpox were immune to future infections. So they would intentionally infect healthy people with matter taken from someone with smallpox in the hopes that it would create a milder illness and they would become immune, a practice called variolation. But this would typically result in infecting the healthy individual with the risk of them developing the full disease, which could then be spread to others and overall increasing the spread of the virus. Edward Jenner's vaccine, in which he used cowpox material to fight against smallpox, was the beginning of modern immunology. His vaccine was a much safer and effective alternative to vaccines previously used in Asia and Africa, as it had mild symptoms and actually significantly reduced the risk of contraction. His efforts not only led to the eradication of smallpox, but also the creation of future vaccines. And vaccines play a very important role in fighting diseases today in modern medicine. So, Edward Jenner's efforts and his invention of the smallpox vaccine directly and indirectly prevented millions of deaths and paved the way for modern immunology and medicine.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about a molecular mechanism of the variola virus. So the variola virus is a DNA virus, which mean one second. Which mean that most DNA viruses use the nuclear of the cell. But this virus is different because it can copy itself in the cytoplasm using its own tools, which lead us to that the virus makes proteins that block the immune system, which help the virus itself to hide. And it also helped to stop the cell death. So basically, infected cells stay alive longer, which give the virus more time to make copies. Also, this virus makes proteins that help it move from one cell to another. And these actions makes the virus strong and help it spread fast. Mm, Also, I'm gonna talk about some research findings. Um, the first research that I found is called Smallpox, a review for health educators. This article basically describes how the smallpox spreads and how it affected different groups around the world. It also says that teaching people about the science, about how it spreads, and how to stop it helped lower the number of cases. This article also says that public health messages and vaccines were important to control outbreaks, and it shows the importance of education when fighting a disease. And the second research that I'm going to talk about is called Lessons for Implementations from the World Most Successful Program and the Global Eradication of Smallpox. So this article talks about the strategies that made the smallpox eradication program successful. It also it emphasized about watching for new cases, reporting them fast, and using vaccines in the right places were very important. And it also says that countries needed to work together and plan well. Um, it shows that when the world works together, a disease can be removed completely.
Okay, so to summarize our findings, smallpox was a commonly fatal disease caused by the variola virus, which is a DNA virus that replicates in the cytoplasm, releases its own enzymes and proteins, and starts transcription immediately, taking control of the host cell and inhibiting immune system response significantly, which is why it was such a prevalent and deadly virus. Although its origin remains uncertain, it is believed that smallpox developed about 6,000 years ago and possibly even dates back to ancient Egypt, as scientists hypothesize that scabs found on the mummy of Pharaoh Ramses V could potentially be evidence of smallpox. Although there were no initial symptoms during the incubation period, affected individuals eventually experienced fever, chills, headaches, backaches, rashes, scabs, and scars, among other symptoms. Smallpox had a devastating impact globally, resulting in at least 3 million deaths from just the Aztec and Inca empires alone. It also caused 400,000 deaths yearly in 18th century Europe, as well as at least 300 million deaths in the 20th century. This eventually led to the development of the first vaccine by Edward Jenner, a doctor who proved cowpox created immunity against smallpox and is also considered the father of immunology. This eventually led to the eradication of smallpox with the help of the World Health Organization, which declared the eradication of smallpox on May 8th, 1980. Edward Jenner's vaccine and research played a significant role in modern immunology and medicine. Additionally, research shows that public health education, awareness, and eradication programs also play an important role in shaping modern approaches to disease control and preparing an effective response for future outbreaks.
And he,
And
oh,
sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
And these are all our citations that we used for our presentation.
Most of them, they're, not all of them, they're research peer articles that we found in either FIU library or Google Schools. I think that is cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.